Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Jamie Kunkle, and I'm joined today with Dr. Janell Payne. And this is our Tales from the Trenches. We're going to talk a lot about our chronic illness practices and, just maybe some current events and kind of what's happening this year in the world of healthcare and everything and what has us excited. We're going to get a little up close and personal about our personal practices and how we operate in the chronic illness realm. Some of you may know me, but I'm a practicing naturopathic physician in the state of Oregon and in California. Although I'm a naturopathic doctor in California, not a naturopathic physician. We'll get to that later. Um,
Details. It's in the
Janelle and
details.
I both, yeah, exactly, yes. Janelle and I both operate in Oregon as well, and that's where our home bases are. So here we are from the Pacific Northwest. Janelle, tell us a little bit about yourself, and we will move on to a lot of very interesting things today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that, Jamie. I am a naturopathic doctor. I practice here in Bend, Oregon. I am currently licensed in Montana and Arizona as well, pending some licensure in Washington and Idaho. I'm kind of working on that slowly gaining some ground to where I can see patients in a broader area. I treat patients with complex chronic illness, and I specialize in PANDAS PANS. So
Right
I'm going
on.
to that a little bit more
Well,
later.
thank you for joining
Yeah.
me. I'm usually doing these things kind of semi-solo. Some of you may have seen me on the Gordon Medical. That's my primary practice. Maybe see me on some of those channels. So this will be a little bit different, which is kind of cool. So you'll see some similarities in some of the discussion points, but it's still me. But we're gonna try to switch it up a little bit and make it interesting. So this is our sort of real talk, so to speak, of the chronic illness realm. So let's see where it goes. So first of all, I'd like us to maybe define what chronic illness really means, because to us, honestly, and probably once again, what is sort of the reality of chronic illness when you're in the trenches seeing these people, versus kind of what we're told and what the media says and that kind of thing. Because when I read or look up or whatever chronic illness statistics or something like that, they're like, oh, heart disease, diabetes,
Yeah.
cancer, the big three, the usuals, right? And I mean, those are chronic illnesses. I don't, I'm not denying that, but the stuff that we see on a daily basis may have elements of some of those things, but it's a lot more complicated, isn't it? So yeah, tell me, Janelle, how do you think of the word chronic illness in our realm and what we see every day? How would you define that?
That's a good question. So, how would I define chronic illness? It is the absence of the foundations of health.
Mm,
And, like if you don't have the foundations of health in place consistently for, then you are going to have some sort of disease within your body. And that said, chronic illness, when I look at my patients, it's their activities of daily living are severely compromised. Or some are mildly compromised, some are moderately, and some are severely compromised. But that's kind of the crux of chronic illness is when you can't do what you want to do in a day, right? Whether it's
yeah,
get work day, go for a walk, jog a marathon, like it's different for everybody, right? I mean, one
that's
person's
it.
chronic illness is another person's, great functioning day, right? So
It's highly individual, isn't it? It's
it's really
about that individual not living their optimal life every day,
exactly
living to their optimal potential. Because I mean, I think that a lot of chronic illnesses that we see when people first start experiencing symptoms, they may be blamed on age or,
yeah,
stress or age-related symptoms and different things like this. But then they're told, "Oh, just clean up your diet, go exercise, and go do the usual things." But those things don't work.
right.
Um,
Yes.
it's a little beyond sort of simple answers, or in most acute illnesses that one sees, no matter how severe they are and whether they need intervention or not, they actually get better with the passage of time. They they become easier to deal with. The body heals because the body's always wanting to be in balance, to be in
Yes.
homeostasis, to heal to its full potential. But in chronic illness, something's obstructing it. And just giving it one single label may not be enough too.
I agree. And
So
And to say it's an absence of foundations of health, it makes it almost sound like the patient's not doing the work to get those foundations of health.
Yeah,
And really, to further define that, I should say the foundations of health aren't achievable in these patients. Like they
yeah,
can't sleep through the night, they can't get a good night's sleep. There's something obstructing that. The ICD-10 code, insomnia secondary to a medical condition is what I always use. I don't use it primary insomnia, right? My patients
right,
have insomnia based on a medical condition. And so,
right.
and I'm just highlighting one key fact, that we do a lot of victim blaming in medicine,
Yeah,
right? Well, you're not doing all the things. You're not eating right, exercising, all that. And I can tell you,
it's your fault.
it's your fault. And I can tell you, I've exercised twice this week because it was that kind of a week, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm trying and I can't even meet all the foundations of health.
Yeah.
So,
And that's how
and
you can tell the difference
right,
between like if it's age related stuff, because our it does become a little more challenging for our system to be in perfect regulation all the time as we get older. But the big difference is if you address those foundations of health, things often change and they respond more favorably. And I'm not saying they won't respond in a chronic illness case that we're talking about, but the response is a little more profound and a little more obvious and makes a lot more sense in somebody that's otherwise healthy if they're having, some age-related ailments like I don't know, degenerative joint disease. They're more achy, stiff in the morning. I mean, who's not stiff in the morning when you're, past 35 probably. Let's just say 30. I don't know. Maybe some of you aren't.
not
Okay,
me.
good.
I'm
That's
not.
good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I have plenty of other issues. Don't get me wrong. Like
Okay,
we'll
that's
get into
good.
that later,
Yeah.
but yes,
Yeah.
but stiffness, no, that's great.
No, not so much, but
Yeah,
something else,
not so
maybe
much.
else. Yeah, that was just an example, but yeah, maybe
Yeah,
something else though. So,
I
some
know.
other kind of daily
I just
ailment
said it.
that's a little annoying, but not quite super mega
Yeah,
debilitating, let's just say.
I
Okay.
agree. Can I jump into some statistics? I
Yes,
can pronounce.
please.
Um, okay, so I just did a really simple Google search, on statistics of chronic disease in the United States. And this is going to out me a little bit, but I started with the year of my birth, 1974, because I just wanted to pick some highlighted time, because I can't show you a graph how it's trending over the time. So I just wanted to pick like the year of my birth, the year of my graduation, 1992, and then our current year, 2024. So in the US population, this is CDC website material. In 1974, 10% of the population had a chronic illness. And in 1992, 20% of the population had a chronic illness. So the time in 18 years that I was in school, we doubled our chronic illness population. Now, currently in 2024, we have 40% of the population with a chronic illness. That's alarming. Now I'm going to move to children. The
Mm.
prevalence of chronic illness in children in the 70s is 1.8%. Okay, we got to let that sink in because 1.8%, relatively small, right?
Yeah.
In the 1990s, when I graduated, 6.5%, more than doubled, tripled. In 2006, oh wait, 2006, it says the prevalence increased to 7.5%, but that's not quite the rate that I saw. I'm going to have to come back to that. There are some data that show that the rates of chronic illness in children. Oh, here it is. It's right in front of my eyes. I didn't highlight it. You have to highlight
Ah,
things
yeah, you
differently.
got to highlight
It
things.
says
Yeah.
the prevalence currently, the recent data shows that up to 54% of US children have been diagnosed with
54.
a chronic illness. 54% of
Oh
children.
my gosh. That's
Asthma,
crazy.
obesity, developmental disorders, and mental health conditions. And
That's a
so
problem.
it's interesting that in 2006 it was 7.5, but the prevalence now is
Yeah.
is increasing at an alarming rate. And I don't know what happened between 2006 and now. And and frankly, from the 1990s to now, it took a big jump, right? If we really want to go back. And
Sure.
so, and then like I looked up the rates of autism. And in the 1970s, do you have a guess what the rates of autism in the 70s were?
In the
Not to put you on the
70s,
spot.
I don't know. 1%, less than 1%.
Yeah, 0.5%. Yeah.
Ah, look at
So,
me.
yeah, one in 2,000 children. In the year 2000, any guess? In the year 2000?
10%.
Not quite. Yeah, 6.7.
Ah,
And
okay.
so,
I
yeah,
rounded up.
yeah, yeah. not bad. 1 in 150. And in the year 2020,
Mm, 20%.
oh, 27.6%,
Ooh,
1 in 36. California, in fact, has higher rates even reported than the rest of the country. And let me see, CDC 1 in 22 in
wow.
California.
And then
Yeah,
people will say between 2000 and 2020, there was a better, I guess, better diagnostics, and the spectrum of
sure,
autism and neurodiversity had
sure.
expanded. So, I mean, people are always going to counter argument that,
Yeah, and I think that
but
that's really important to say. Like, we do have better diagnostics. We are recognizing conditions that maybe didn't have a label, didn't have a title, didn't have any kind of recognition until they became more prevalent that we had to acknowledge them, right?
right.
And so I can understand that. However, I mean, I think we can clearly acknowledge that the rates of autism are increasing,
Yeah.
and not just our diagnostic capabilities.
What
So,
about the previous statistic you just said? It was all chronic illness in children. It was 54%. So even if you try to, you know, break down one illness statistics, oh, there's something there's an explanation for that, so to speak, because we're just better at diagnosing or whatever we are better at right now. That doesn't explain the entirety of
no, it
chronic
doesn't.
illness in children. 54% is a staggering number. Children are not supposed to be that ill.
Right.
Childhood illness has notoriously been a rarity. I mean, yeah, there was a time period where any human on this earth could spontaneously die from an infection or something like that. And we got better at handling that, and so the mortality went down in young people as well. But to say that the children are chronically ill to that rate is pretty mind blowing to me. So yeah, there's something that we're missing here, and we could speculate. I mean, I don't know if we know entirely, but the first thing we need to do as a society is to see the problem in front of us and accept that it is a problem, and not
Absolutely.
to explain it away, so to speak.
Do you know, and do you know families that are healthy? Like, just thinking of all the families that you know, your kids' friends, your kids' friends' families. I mean,
Yeah,
can you think of a family that doesn't have chronic illness with their kiddos? Because I can't.
it's hard. Yeah, these
Actually, okay, I
days,
can think of a family. I have a family in my head
yeah,
that I
it
that
is
I feel like doesn't.
possible, but it's rare. And
Yeah,
and just to put it into perspective, if the average nuclear family is still two children, uh, spouse or significant other or whatever, so four people in total,
yep,
half those kids, even one of the two, will have a chronic illness or have a high chance of a chronic illness, and it is possible that the other one, could as well. And there probably are genetic components to these things. All chronic illness is a confluence or a meeting point of genetics and epigenetics, the environment.
right,
So our genetics probably have changed to some degree because things that have happened in the past will change our genes, and those will be passed on to the next generation. And it's possible, for example, that the Great Depression, not having abundance of food and access, and probably less optimal health during that era, may have created some genetic drift, and now we're dealing with it to some degree. But genetics alone, it's very hard to explain that because
hard to explain it.
kids children will manifest genetic disorders early, but they have largely been considered to be rare occurrences. Like if a child has a mitochondrial disorder, or if they have even autism, is not considered a purely genetic issue.
Exactly.
Um, Not in the sense that it is going to be passed on. There's a very small percentage of genes that are passed on to create autism. It's stuff that's peripheral to those genes. It's stuff that's going to affect how those individuals respond to the adversities of the world that we live in. And
Exactly.
so that's where something is happening in the environment. Okay,
I was going to
something's
say, you
happening
bring
in
up a
the
good
environment.
point because you talk about genetics and the pressure, and environment is huge. I think environment is really putting pressure on our genetics currently. We aren't able to adapt with the onslaught of chemicals and um, essentially environmental assaults.
Yeah,
And I think overall we're losing tolerance. None of
yeah,
the things that we are going to talk about in upcoming podcasts, at least to me are new, right? Like
Right.
it, chronic infections, strep throat is not new. Lyme disease is not new. We have these things dating back a long time, and people were pretty resilient to them. Even mold, people were more resilient to mold and mycotoxins.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to see that people are losing tolerance to that. We have less capacity to be resilient. And I think that that's really the crux of this. Like, how do we get our capacity back? And
Yeah.
I don't think it's purely genetics,
No.
but time will tell.
Unlikely. I mean, you can
Unlike,
evaluate one's genetics in terms of try to find the relationship of those genetics to that chronic illness, but it's not a perfect world. And, we're not slaves to our genes either, and our genes don't necessarily dictate our lives entirely.
ex-
It's like the whether a gene turns on or not, or whether it expresses is also related to the environment that we're in, and that's how humans are adaptable to the world. So the overarching theory here is that there is an overburdening effect happening from the environment. And I'm not just saying it's all physical. There may be other elements to this. I mean, if you think about how our society runs today versus 20 years ago, I mean, there's a lot of things. And I know every generation is going to say that. Oh,
how
when I
much
was a kid.
computer time we get, less life,
Yeah.
right? Like how many hours I sat this week.
Yeah.
Trust me,
Yeah.
I'm still feeling it.
Yeah.
How many hours I sat.
Yeah, I mean, even just
Yeah,
doing this. I mean, I wasn't doing this 20 years ago.
right,
So,
right, exactly.
so screens, yeah, they got to play a role. Technology's got to play a role. I think the biggest problem is that when you start bringing this stuff up, um, it's easy to try to defend one thing and say that that one thing couldn't possibly be the issue. And it's probably true that it isn't just that one thing. So if somebody's going to say that, oh, we have too much screen time, well, there are no good studies to suggest that screen time is really a problem. It's maybe there's a correlation or something like that. It's an observation. And it's like, how about glyphosate or pesticides or herbicides or something like that? It seems like there's been like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma cases on the rise or something around that. But then these financial interests are going to say, well, there's not really hard proof though, not hard enough to actually take this out of our society. And that
I,
brings
and,
us
and I'm
to,
hoping that this
yeah,
changes because we have seen some pretty good research. Again, correlation, not
yeah,
causation necessarily, but correlating that even the migrating motor complex of the small intestine is affected, and by glyphosate. So we are starting to garner some attention, but I think it's multifactorial. It's still
yeah.
at the end of the day, it's multifactorial.
And that really brings us to how we in the trenches here look at chronic illness. We have to look at it at the individual level because you can't make these gross generalizations. You can't just say glyphosate's killing all of us or technology is killing all of us or something like that. You can't go to those extremes. You have to look at the individual and what is affecting them because what it comes down to is that it either is or it isn't. And if it is affecting them, it's a problem for that individual.
Right.
So we need to stop. It's important to look at population and public health and everything. And you'll hear me probably criticize a public health first agenda, on more than one occasion. And it's just because
So I
for
mean
us
that
as physicians, we have to think of the person in front of us first
totally.
to a great degree. I mean, that's the oath that we take is like treat that whole person, do no harm. All these different principles that we've all taken oaths to uphold. We have to be able to do that. I mean, people have privacy protections. They have all kinds of things, but like it's that person in front of you that you need to figure out, that you need to get better at the end of the day. I mean, you can think of public health, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's important sometimes to be like, how can I support, my community at large? How can I support this country at large from a healthcare perspective? But the people that we see are there was multi-systemic issues. There's more than one system that's dysregulated within this person, and they and my bias personally is that I treat a lot of the sensitive patients that have lost the immune tolerances and everything too. Unfortunately, you can't just jam them into a standard uh, operation system in terms of like You can get away with eating all of the common standard American diet foods. You can even tolerate every single one of these vaccinations that you're supposed to take. Like there's an intolerance issue to what is expected of them in the world too. Like maybe they can't work 40-hour weeks.
Right.
It's like,
This is really you bring up such a good point because I think that this is really where I get a little excited about what the future of medicine might bring us and what it might reveal, right? And back in the day, back in the 70s, it would be ridiculous if you said, "Well, I can't eat this food and I have to go gluten free and all that," right? It was a little bit like, "What is wrong with you that you are so sensitive that you can't eat what I'm fixing you for dinner," right? If you came over, like it was an anomaly if somebody had a food intolerance or a food allergy. And
mhm,
now you fast or even an adverse vaccine reaction. So now fast forward and we are precarious enough in our health that and at a tipping point that we're starting to really see where all these intolerances are, right? Like
mhm.
it's one person can't go into a moldy building, like you mentioned, some person can't tolerate a vaccine, another person can't eat dairy or wheat or corn or soy or, you know, all the above. And I think that that's the acknowledgement we need to actually make a change. And so we have to see how people are getting and it's indiscriminatory, right? At this point, it's going over socioeconomic, boundaries, whereas typically poor health was in, more socioeconomic challenged families, right?
Yeah.
And and I would say it's not like that anymore. We are
No.
really starting to see that this is chronic illness. It knows no boundaries.
Yeah, it's just like the wildfire in LA right now. It's not sparing the ultra rich. Um, Unfortunately, the wildfire of chronic inflammation, chronic illness is not sparing anybody right
It's
now.
not sparing anyone.
I mean, you can't, I mean, unless you really went to the trouble to somehow create some sort of bubble safe house space that is completely out of the world as we know it. And that's just not really like, I don't think that's an optimal way to live either. I mean, I've always said that maybe you could do that with somebody temporarily and like reset their health in some way, but that's not the way we could live. So, no,
Right.
it's not sparing anybody. I mean, it probably is that some folks in certain socioeconomic areas of this country, like certainly they probably do have it worse as far as access goes to certain medicines and everything, and so
This is
access to this medicine even, I would have to say, there aren't enough of us out there really doing this type of medicine, and I think that's important. And that kind of brings me to how how is the medicine that we're doing really different? How do we see that it's different? How is the term functional medicine sort of gets thrown out there too, and it is probably, if I had to give sort of a standardized definition, it's probably pretty apt or close, is that we're trying to figure out how to optimize the function of the human being. So sometimes when we're evaluating labs or other things like that, we're not looking at them as uh, you know, normal or not normal. It's like black and white.
right.
Like it's optimal or not or suboptimal.
Right.
Pattern driven uh understanding and diagnostics. Not just giving somebody a standard label, what we call syndrome diagnoses, which are essentially just a set of signs and symptoms, trying to find the cause beyond that. So you could say depression due to, or like you said, insomnia due to dot dot dot, figuring out the
Right.
due to, so to speak. But I'd love to hear your perspective. How do you think that we're different in this world as practitioners? And I mean, do you I personally think, and I'd like to get your opinion on whether you think this medicine could be the answer to some of these chronic illness issues or not.
Yeah, that more good questions. I would say how are we different? Well, we do attempt to look at the whole being. We do attempt to look at is this driven by genetics? Is this driven by infections? Is this driven by environment? Is this driven by, whatever, right? We do tend to look at a broad array. Like when a patient first comes to me, I'm like, we're going to tease this out. I sometimes it's not clear. Is this all environment driven? Is this diet driven? Is this, you know, foundations of health driven? And so I would say that's where I start, right? Is just trying to cast a wide net. I want to see whatever comes my way. And I use the term low-hanging fruit a lot. Thank you, Paul
Hmm.
Anderson. I always, I kind of you know, adopted that from him. But the treat the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that we can treat, that's easy to treat, that makes an
Yeah.
appreciable difference right away. And
Hmm.
something that you said the other day is time. I
Mm.
totally forget that. Like, how long are your new patient appointments?
2 hours. It's
Same,
long.
same. I'm like, hunker down, bring food, bring water, take a bathroom break, bring a blanket, whatever you need, because we're going to be here for a while. I want to hear your story. I can tell you that during the course of that 2 hours, the number of patients who break down and cry because number one, they haven't been heard. Number
Hmm.
two, it's painful to recount their stories, right? They're like, I forgot about that. Or the volume of emails that I get the next day or portal messages the next day, like, I forgot this. This was
Yeah.
really important, and maybe you should know this,
Yeah.
But it's really trying to piece together their health history and look for trends and patterns and when was it that their health history shifted. And I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. It seems like when you have maybe 10 or 15 minutes tops with a practitioner, and maybe you filled out some intake form with some details, and you kind of hope that they might have read through it. But still, you have to really abbreviate your your symptoms and your priorities. It's kind of an acute care model, as it's been stated before, in terms of what do you have going on? Well, I have like 16 things going on, but I have to kind of pick one of them. And
Yes.
that's the only thing that that individual is going to take care of me with that day. And more than likely, because it is complicated, that one thing might get a simple recipe response like a drug or whatever. And I'm not blaming any particular individuals within that system. It really is a systemic issue. It's something that needs to change. There's very little in the way of private practice out there. Everything is like a hospital-driven system now.
Yeah,
For the most part, I'm not saying there aren't private clinics, but they're very rare. There used to be more community country doc type setups, back
for
in the
sure.
day. And there was more of this element, though, where you might spend some more time with people. You might get to know their family a little bit better. You might get to know more of their tendencies. And they may have to come to multiple visits because maybe they still don't spend a lot of time, but their needs can be met on some level. And I
Yeah.
think we're getting away from some of that. And so our medicine is, it's not just a response to the world as we see it. This is the way it's always been. And if you look at traditional medical systems, like I have a master's in acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine, for example. So a lot of East Asian systems, they follow these types of patterns as well in terms of spending more time figuring out the cause, finding patterns and different things like this, and then individually tailoring that treatment and seeing the person as a whole and not just the sum of its parts, and being very careful to label label individuals in this process. People always ask me, I don't know if they ask you too, but they're like, so what's my diagnosis? What? So what is it? Tell me what it is. Like what is it? IT, one thing. I'm like, I'm sorry, but it's not just one thing. It's like there's a little bit of this and a little
We
bit of
have a
that.
we have a list of things. Well, and on the diagnosis, like sometimes I like it when patients come in with some previously existing diagnoses because it gives me a clue, right? Like
Yeah,
if they come in with fibromyalgia, PTSD, like when they come in with some stuff, I'm like, I already have an idea, right?
it
Like
gives you some
that
ideas.
that gives me some ideas. I mean, like I have direction, right? When I see those kinds of things. Um, and then also with the diagnoses, I feel like if we can get them an accurate diagnosis, not a just a bunch of acronyms, right? But if we can give them accurate diagnoses, it empowers them. They can go back, they can research that. I try to
Mhm.
say, like go back home and here's some books you can read, here's a podcast you can listen to,
Yeah,
here's a website you can reference. I try to help guide them because you can go down some rabbit trails. We all know,
yeah.
like with these things.
And I will oblige if somebody is very insistent on getting a label diagnosis. I will give it to them if needed. And sometimes it does serve them in terms of communicating with their care team or their family or other things like this, because it can seem like I mean, these people oftentimes have so much medical trauma too. They've been gaslighted so many times by conventional practitioners, and it leads their family to believe that they maybe it is all in their head, or maybe they are crazy or something like that. And so, getting some validation and being heard is important. So sometimes in those first phases when we're working with these things, the way I see it is that their previous diagnoses can be helpful, but I'm kind of starting from scratch, because those diagnoses may be junk diagnoses anyway, like chronic
Absolutely.
fatigue syndrome. I mean, what the heck does that mean?
Right.
It doesn't really mean anything. And I think that has actually been in, just as an aside, I think they have included chronic fatigue in some of the statistics of chronic illness, which is interesting. But once again, it's a syndrome diagnosis. It doesn't tell you where it's coming from, nor what the most appropriate way to approach that individual is.
Exactly.
And my other just aside on labels and diagnoses is that in the beginning phases it may be okay, but I have to be careful to allow that to sort of merge with the identity of the person. That okay, now I'm a chronic fatigue patient, or now I'm a Lyme patient, or something like that. Because that it can be sort of validating, and they can get an answer to their issues, but if they kind of stay there too long, then they kind of start to, I guess,
Live it.
live it and kind of
Self-fulfilling.
lose something about themselves, their own identity, their own individuality, their own sometimes their even own creativities in different things. It feels a little disempowering sometimes when a person that's not you tells you who you are and what you are, you know?
I cannot emphasize that enough. You hit the nail on the head because I ask patients, I want you to identify with this diagnosis enough to get treatment, enough to
Yeah,
motivate you to get through treatment. But this isn't you. This isn't your personality, and you need to be able to shed it, right? Like
yeah,
I have Lyme disease. I'm not a limey. I won't allow myself to be identified as a limey. No, I'm not in that group. Like
yeah,
I have a disease that did once affect me significantly. It doesn't affect me significantly at this time, thank God. And I move beyond that. You got to move beyond that
yeah.
and learn to live with some things. And another point that I want to make about pediatrics, I see a
Yes.
lot of kiddos, 10, 12, in that adolescent age range and teenagers. And I just say, you're not a sick kid. Like I don't want you to
Yeah,
see yourself as a sick kid. I want you to
yeah,
see yourself as a kid that has some imbalances. We're going to get that body back in balance. There may
that's
be an
right.
infection that's driving something that's disproportionate, right?
Yeah,
But you are not a sick kid. You
yeah.
are in a
I think we
state.
have to be very careful with children specifically because adults, it might be easier to regain sort of who you once were and what you once were, especially if you lived, let's just say, the majority of your life as not a sick person. I think getting back to being not sick you is probably easier, but you have to realize that these kids haven't been on the earth that long. And when we're labeling them during their really integral neural development and everything, and where they are learning to find their identity and find themselves in this world, we have to be kind of careful as practitioners to label them. And I see a lot of example, and you probably see this too. I'm really talking specifically, well, I could say about anything, but definitely the psych diagnoses I'm really careful with kids, like labeling a child anxiety, for example. I mean, I think we got to be kind of careful just saying that to
Right.
kids that you're just anxious. It's like, well, why am I anxious? You don't give a good answer. So it makes it sound like there's something broken with them, something wrong with them. And their anxiety is a symptom of something else that's going on in their life. And it is either a physical issue, or an emotional or traumatic or whatever external uh, process that also should be addressed and worked with. And one thing that I see with kids is that if you remove some of those imbalances from their system, because their brain is still developing, they're still very plastic, in terms of their ability to change and heal, that they will bounce out of that. They will get out of that, and they can get out of that quicker sometimes than adults even. So maybe we should be careful sometimes with labels. Yeah.
I think we need to be very careful with kiddos. And like my first appointment with the families of a patient with PANDAS PANS, and we should, that's a pediatric neuropsychiatric disorder associated with strep. And My very first appointment is just with the parents, ideally. Like sometimes that's not possible, but ideally, if I can choose, it would just be with the parents. That way they can speak freely because it can be traumatizing to the child to hear how their
Yeah.
behavior has been. They often don't even relate to what their parents are describing, right?
Hmm.
What the parents describe can sometimes be on the verge of monstrous, right?
Yeah.
And and these kids are like, wow, I really behaved bad. There's such an element of shame. And I just
Yeah.
have to like, when the kids hear some of that, I'm like, you know what? This is not to shame you. There is something in your body that's making you feel rage and irritability. And I want to help remove that so that you can just live your best life, right?
Yeah.
Like there has to be we have to take that element of shame away from them. Sorry, it's gonna make me tear.
Yeah.
I wasn't
This
expecting to
is,
tear.
and it's an important subject. I mean, it really is. And I have two children myself, two young children, 9 and 7, so two daughters. And yeah, it gets I get emotional too about this kind of stuff. And I think, I mean, whether you have kids or not, I mean, children are our future, not to be cliche, but they really are our future. So I was told by a pediatrician once even that if the reason why she worked with children is that it's easier to fix these things whenever you address them when you're young than
Yes.
wait until there's something that's very much ingrained into the system later. And the fact that we're seeing a big rise in childhood chronic illness to this degree means we're not, as a society, doing a very good job right now in mitigating these things, and I don't, we're not doing a very good job. I'll just tell you that.
Right. Right. No, we're not doing a very good job.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
in further podcasts, I do want to address like the complexity of our patients and how not only are our patients more complex than they were when I started practicing medicine, but they're harder to treat. They're harder to get back to baseline.
yeah,
And there's an element of just a heightened immune response or a heightened level of dysfunction that is not as simple as it used to be. Like I can still recall like back in the day, like I had a pretty well laid out plan for how I was going to approach these cases. And
yeah,
now I'm like, things have been shaken up. In a post-COVID world, things are different. This isn't
yeah.
this. Kids are getting
People,
sick multiple times a year. And
it makes us harder for us as practitioners to be really linear in our
yes,
process, our thinking, or whatever, our
yeah,
treatments. And I've gotten told I'm not linear enough, and I understand that. We want this process to be linear and straightforward, and we want it to be able to work as if it was normal healing in terms of what I mentioned. The passage of time is an upward trajectory of smooth, beautiful climbing of a health mountain that is crested within a 6 to 12 month period. And I can predict that perfectly. And I can say, yeah, this is what's going to happen for you. This is your prognosis. Unfortunately, the prognostics, we can predict them to the best extent we can, but they have gotten a little cloudier, I think, because of the many wild cards, the many variables that some we understand, some we don't understand. Maybe in 10 years we'll understand them better, but right now we don't fully understand. And so we'll dive into that a little deeper
yeah,
in future discussions, I would imagine. But let's turn a page a little bit and talk about some more hopeful things.
okay.
Uh, because of
Like to
all
talk
doom and
about
gloom.
hopeful
Yeah,
things?
let's talk about hope.
Yeah,
But this year, this is 2025, so we're sort of post-pandemic, right? I mean, COVID's still floating around out there, but we're not all in lockdown mode, and most of us have immunity to COVID at this point. We hope anyway. I've had it like maybe one or two patients that have never seen COVID, but so there are a few people that are still out there that don't have immunity, but most of us have some level of protection. So it's turned a little more into a bit of a nuisance. But so we're post-pandemic era. We're going into a new administration, for better or for worse. There's, whatever your political views are,
some
there's
some
probably
things are for the
concerns.
better.
Yeah, some things may be for the
For the
better.
better.
So, what gives you hope this year in 2025? We're halfway through the roaring 20s here.
Yeah, I'm pretty hopeful on a couple of fronts. I mean, number one, I'm a fairly optimistic person, right? Now, if I can't find how to treat my patients and get them well. Like I know that it's just because it's my own lack of understanding or knowledge in a particular area. Like there's some way. I know that there's some way to get that patient well. So like I just inherently I have a lot of hope for these patients, right?
Mhm.
Um, like I may not have all the answers, but I'm certainly going to try, right? And
Yes.
just being dynamic with my learning, that sort of thing. But back to hope. I find that like with the new administration, I am hopeful that RFK is going to really expose some of these things about some of these negative determinants that are affecting our chronic health. And so whether it's vaccines, whether it's red dye in the foods, whether it's glyphosate, and I know there's a lot of reservations about RFK. I mean, I've heard a lot of the criticisms about him, but I think when you really go back into RFK's history, you know, he doesn't come from a perfect health, right? He doesn't come from that. He was an addict.
Mm.
He's reformed, right? Whatever reformed means, that's a whole nother topic. Um, but he himself has got himself in a better state of health, right? Took an interest. He's an attorney that went after environmental groups, to
Mm.
help clean up our air, clean up our waters, like the basics, right? Again, we go back to the foundations, and I'm hopeful. I mean, I feel like he's going to reveal some things, and frankly, things that need revealed. We need things that are changing. We
We
need
got to start the
yeah,
conversation
yeah,
somewhere. And for better or for worse, our current system requires to some degree the leadership to take it seriously.
yeah.
And like I said, whether you agree with all the politics of the current administration or whether you agree with RFK being a potential character within it, for whatever reason, there's a potential there to start the conversation, to bring the awareness to these issues in the environment. I mean, environmental lawyer. I mean, what else could you ask for there? A lot of us on the left or the right understand that the environment. There's got to be something going on with it, right? If we look at all those statistics,
There
and
has
some of us have embraced a cleaner living, cleaner food, organic foods, whatever, less chemicals in our life. And some of us haven't had to do that because we haven't gotten terribly sick, maybe, or maybe we're in denial. I don't know. Maybe we're not ready for the conversation. But when you look
and
at
maybe
those
there's no
statistics,
access to those things. I
and
mean,
maybe
again,
there's no access to that
and limited
information, and
access.
that's not something. I mean, if you just watch the TV, like the NFL playoffs or something right now, what do you see? Fast food, fast food, fast food, fast food. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's just all over us all the time. So why would we believe that stuff is actually, not killing us slowly or something like that, like why would we go to that extremes? And then when people do react that way, they're like, oh, that's overreactive and there's no proof and that's why I said it's like, well, maybe for that individual it is not helping them and maybe an adversity within their health structure, but it's not for everybody in the same way. But the fact of the matter is if we're seeing once again elevated childhood chronic illness, well, we got to do a little bit better with something, right? So
Right.
I'm thinking that this will at least, assuming RFK gets confirmed and goes through that whole process smoothly,
Right.
which I don't think it'll be smooth. I'd like to think that at the very least, take the good with the less good, that there'll be a conversation starting there. And for all those concerns, I'll address the elephant in the room. They're not going to ban vaccines or anything. Like they're not. I highly doubt that that's going to happen within this administration. It hasn't happened before. I don't know why it would happen now. But at the very least, there's going to be a conversation there as well, because as I mentioned, some vaccines do harm people, and maybe our schedule needs amendment. We'll talk about vaccine scheduling at some point. I wanted to be very clear that we're not coming from a quote unquote anti-vax standpoint here, really. I mean, we're trying to figure out what's best for the human that's in front of us at any given time. And delayed scheduling has had some, good evidence in other
Has some
countries.
merit. It does
Yeah, it
have
has
merit.
some merit, for example. So maybe there's a conversation that doesn't need to be so reactive on both sides of the aisle here, so to speak, where
There's definitely some reactivity that I hear in response to RFK that he's, responsible for deaths and, like all this, and then he wants to pull childhood vaccines. He has repeatedly stated over and over and over again that he is calling for safety studies. Like
that's it.
that is inherently like, how can we argue that? How can we argue that somebody just wants a safety study? These are the
Right.
basic tenets of medicine. is this safe? Are we doing more harm than we're doing good? We
Yeah.
just have to reevaluate that. And it's okay if we reevaluate it, as we have in medicine over and over, and we find out that, oh, this wasn't really a great recommendation after all.
It's
We have to,
okay to be wrong.
it's
Okay.
okay.
Like my
Yes.
brain 10 years ago is different than my brain now, and how I see the world and how I see what I think is right and wrong. And it's not just an opinion. You can find out through science that sometimes, not always,
Right.
that something is more right than you thought it was before, or more wrong than what you thought it was before. And so you have to be okay with changing your paradigm, with changing the scientific paradigm, the model of thinking. I think if we get too stuck and rigid in it, we're not progressing. They say even when a really good scientific paper comes out with really compelling evidence, it might take at least 10 years to integrate those things
Oh,
into
at the very
common
least.
practice, at the
And
least.
it's important to note, like we can find, information at our fingertips. It makes me crazy. That whole, like I can find a research study to support this. You know what? I can find a research study to not support that. In every research study, there's an equal and opposite study, right? And we can get into some of that later, like who's it
Yeah,
funded by?
that's right.
What were their populations that they were assessing, right? And
Yeah,
like, oh, how did they structure the research? And are you a headline research paper or an abstract research, you know,
right.
reader? I mean, and I'm guilty of that myself, right? And when you're
Chat
busy, you're like,
GPT.
okay, this supports my opinion, right? But at the end of the day, we really have to go through it. We really have to have a little more scrutiny and
Scrutinize. Yeah.
yes,
Scrutinize.
absolutely. Scrutinize. We have to scrutinize these things and we have to challenge it. One research paper does not make it fact,
No.
And
And, and
and for
and what
anyone
I,
listening to this podcast beyond the date, what's today's date? Is the 18th?
yes.
January
Yes.
18th, 2025. If you're listening to this podcast beyond a year, I would say it's safe to say we're going to change our opinions about some things,
Oh
right?
yeah, let's
So,
watch this because maybe a lot of you won't even watch this until January of 2026 because this is our first one or something. So
right,
most people don't watch the first one if we do
right,
these things.
right. So
So you're gonna
watch
watch it
this.
next year. Then a bunch of crazy stuff happened, and we could have been
Right.
wrong. And but that's okay. Every
Yes.
day that I see a patient, I try to do my best for them, and I forget about yesterday. I mean, I remember yesterday, but I try to,
Okay.
I don't completely ignore yesterday,
Right.
but I try to just do the best I can every day with the information that
Yeah.
I have. So you have to be willing to be a little pliable, a little fluid, a little, self-critiquing sometimes, but not to the detriment, not like, flailing at yourself or, something like you have to beat yourself up every day because you're not the best of the best of the best of the best. And so we'll get into that later too, because I think it's a really important, point in all science, all scientific thinking and paradigms, trying to keep a fluid paradigm in this world if you have one, and we all kind of do. We all kind of have a general framework of how we see the world and how what we think we know, so
Right.
to
What we
speak.
think we know. Yes,
Hmm.
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
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 And
So,
you probably had similar instructors in school. I had a particular instructor that said, let's take all this in context. He said, in I can't remember what he said, 20 years or whatever, approximately half of what I'm telling you right now is going to be false. The problem is we don't know which half, right? It really
mhm.
made a huge impression on me. Like just don't be so stoic and rigid in your learning, and it's really important to know that like what I see in my clinical practice is really, really different from what an ER doctor sees in every day in their trenches, right? My trenches versus their trenches.
Yeah.
And so when during COVID, when we were talking about a lot of, prevention or treatments and that sort of thing with patients, I said I had to point out like if you ask an ER doctor, they're seeing a very different patient population,
Yeah.
right? And I'm seeing a very different patient population with a different set of outcomes. They're
Right.
seeing negative outcomes from COVID. I might see the negative outcomes from the vaccine. It's really important that we
Yeah.
recognize that neither one of us holds the key or the answers, right?
Yeah, I was saying during the COVID era, if you're a hard liner on either side of any issue with a novel virus that none of us, even to this day,
Right?
have all the answers about, yeah, you could be doing a disservice to your patient, to the person in front of you. And I think it is important to point out our biases. And I will do my best during these podcasts to point out my individual bias. Like as I mentioned, I see very complex chronic illness patients that are very sensitive, that often have been to like 5 to 10 other doctors before me.
Right.
And so, there is a little bit of a canary in the coal mine effect with sensitive patients sometimes, is that they're telling us and they're telling the world that there is something wrong and we should probably be paying attention to it.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're just seeing emergency care, or even cancer is an interesting one sometimes, because sometimes people spontaneously, quote unquote, develop cancer. They may not have a always the progression of symptoms, and suddenly they have cancer. It may just be, oh, I'm having some acute symptoms and now, oh gosh, I have stage 4 cancer. I
Yeah.
mean, it's like every population is different in terms of what you see. So we'll try to bring some oncology docs on at some point. We'll try to bring some
That'd be great.
emergency, people on. I'd love to bring some psychiatrists. I'd love to bring religious leaders even. Heck, I mean, I'm not trying to limit us to the healing potential that's in this world and in your individual life. And so
Yeah.
we'll even get into religion eventually. We'll talk about all of it.
That's
Spirituality.
exciting. Yeah. That's exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
Just to think of all the different people that we can bring in and kind of get their perspective, on chronic illness and how they approach it and what they
Absolutely. Yeah,
yeah.
because I think we're all seeing it. That's the whole point, is that if it's really as common as it's suggested that it is, it means that we are all seeing it every day. We know somebody, and we may even know somebody in our family. We probably do. Even if it's not our immediate family, it may be our uncle or our aunt or our cousin or something like that. And so I think, if we can first acknowledge that, yes, this is a thing that's happening, okay, that person isn't crazy or whatever, even if they're manifesting neuropsychiatric symptoms in some way. Oh, they're just anxious. They're just all in their head. They're psychosomatic, whatever. Give first acceptance that, hey, this thing is happening. We can do better as a society to have the harder conversation that comes, is that what do we need to do different? How can we change things? It is possible, and
Okay. So this brings me, Jamie,
go
and I hope
ahead.
I'm not interrupting here.
Not at all.
What brings you hope? Because I hear you say this is possible. So and I realized that you asked me what brings me hope, and I totally didn't
No,
reciprocate.
I avoided the answer, didn't I? No, I'm kidding. Uh, no, what brings me hope? Well, I think, to me, I think we're on a precipice, one way or another. I think that COVID, for better or for worse, exposed a lot of things. And I'm not saying that the exposure of those things, and I'll get into them later one by one, is going to rapidly change society as we know it. But I think things are in motion. They're in motion in a way that I haven't seen before. And I think at some point, yeah, if maybe it's the higher numbers, maybe it's just how people saw long COVID, people, or people that got really sick from COVID, that just everybody had a mass exposure point to some sort of complicated illness structure. There's more funding for research out there now, even for stuff like Lyme disease, that notoriously has been, also kind of marginalized in a lot of ways.
For sure.
And we have a new administration coming in, for better or for worse. I'm not like a big fan personally of Trump and those people, but I am like excited about somebody like RFK coming in to talk about health and the environment, environmental medicine, what's important for us to understand in terms of chronic illness, and how to live our optimal life. And to me, I think we can bring it back. Like, I'll talk about a lot of other stuff, like other movements that are happening out there in the world. Like, for example, the psychedelic movement. Oh my gosh, mind expansion, but also trying to, find, trying to live the best personal life you can live in this world, not to just be serving other people. I'm just going to be a worker my whole life, and then I'm going to hope that I can retire at 70. That like every day I live my life, I can live the best life that I can possible. And I'm just seeing more of that conversation happening than before. And personal empowerment, people feeling like they can take control of their lives better. And I'm seeing it more out there. I'll just tell you that. And that brings me hope. And I think that if the leadership, because I don't like any politicians, honestly, but the leadership,
I
sorry.
shouldn't say that. There's a couple that I like. All right, I take that back. I walk that back. There's a
I'm
couple that
kidding.
I
I'm
actually
kidding too, to be
have
fair.
some good ethics that I
That was a
really
little that
like.
was a
It's
little
all right. It's all
overboard.
right. No,
But
but in general, politicians are slimy.
yeah, it's
You know,
it's a hard place to
it's a
be.
game.
I can imagine, and people that try to have integrity, for out there, do get get challenged even harder, or they get scrutinized even harder. So if you try to be somebody that's doing the best they can and really wants what's best for the country, those people are going to get torn apart by somebody, because they don't want them to be on any kind of pedestal of self-righteousness or something, or like
Right.
integrity is mentioned or whatever. They don't want to give them that power, so they want to take that away from them. So there is a cutthroat nature to politics that I don't really like. And where I really say I don't like it is mostly that it pits us against each other,
Yes.
puts us against our neighbors. If you get out into your neighborhood, okay, so maybe the guy across the street has a Trump flag, the guy over there had a Harris Waltz sign and drives a Tesla or whatever. I mean, who cares? It's like you get out and actually talk to these people. You don't just look at them superficially. You go out and talk to them.
Hmm.
We have more in common than you think. We all
I no
want the
one said
same
that.
things.
Like we all want the same things.
Yeah.
It's how we think we're going to get there to
Yeah.
get the same things. It may inherently be different, but we all want the same things. We all want to
Yeah.
live peacefully. We all want good health. We all want to like I've
What's best
never
for our
understood the
family, what's best for ourselves. I mean, just like
absolutely.
health, optimal health. We want to feel good. We want to wake up every day and really be like all about the world. We all know that we can't avoid working in this world. We want to work jobs that we enjoy and have fun with, and
Yeah.
make a living in that way. Everybody wants to live a balanced life the best they can in this world. If this is the one life we know we have, in this way, and we don't have that much time. It's a pretty short life in the grand scheme of things. We all kind of want superficial, very core things. And so I think if we can just start from there, so that's what I mean. If we get, I really encourage people to get out into your communities more, and I got to do it more myself too. That don't just spend all your time on this thing, uh,
Right.
consuming all your information or whatever it may be. Get out there and talk to people, because I think the more we can do that, the more we can say, no, I'm not going to play that game to the politics of this
Yeah.
current atmosphere that we live in. I'm not going to
So
play
what
that
you're
game.
saying is I should work less and I should go play pickleball more. Is that what I hear you
Probably.
saying? Because
Yes,
pickleball is a
definitely.
great a
Work,
great
work.
social time for me. And I love it. And I was really bitter this week because I couldn't go run my dog like I wanted to. I couldn't, okay, I don't run. I couldn't let the dog run while I walk and talk with friends, right? Like
Mhm.
ultimately, I want more of that in my life. But I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to make light of what you're
No,
saying.
not at all. No, I
But
mean, and people are just hungry for that change. And I think I just see it
yeah,
everywhere that I go. And so that's kind of what I'm getting at, is I think the great majority of people are ready for this change to happen.
yeah,
And if we have a little bit of nudge from the leadership and the system, because I'm not going to, we can't tear the system down. It's not just going to magically go away. We have to operate
right.
within the system that we live in right now, and then try to make changes that will eventually ripple over time. And it's just that we're not going to be able to change everything overnight. But what I want
Agreed.
to see in 2025, we're in the mid 20s here: motion, movement,
Yep.
momentum.
I think we are going to see some movement also, and this might be a topic for another podcast, but the way healthcare is changing. I'm
Mhm.
concerned. I'm actually like I'm a little concerned about the way healthcare, again, you talked about the precipice. We're kind of at this, we're acknowledging, and I think that most people can acknowledge that the way our healthcare system works right now is too expensive. We pay, I is it the most of any developed country per
Pretty sure.
capita
I wouldn't be
in
surprised.
healthcare? Yet our people are more sick than other countries. Like I need to
Yeah.
get some real data on that. I'm kind of throwing out what I've heard, but I don't have the concrete.
Yeah, we'll get some harder data on that
It,
in
but
future. But
the
I I've heard that as well. Yes.
But the important thing is that the model's not working, right? So then do we go to more of that model, like a single payer model, all government model? That's not efficient. We know
No,
that's
there's
not
not a
efficient.
clear
And
answer.
our friends from Canada, you and I have colleagues from
Yes.
Canada that are on our groups, and they can attest to the fact that that is definitely not a perfect model.
No.
So I'm really concerned about healthcare in the United States. And what some people think is like, well, it's fine if it's all single payer because then we can do kind of a la carte. Like if you want to go see, a cash pay doctor or somebody to specialize in something, you have the liberty to see that. What we have found is that that's actually severely restricted in that single payer model.
Yeah.
And so
True.
I have a lot of reservation about that. I don't love private insurance companies either, right? Like right now, they are definitely for their
Yeah.
own profit. It,
Clearly.
we're going to have to see something shake up there. I would say that's an area of concern for me, like
Yeah.
watching how this is going to shake out.
Absolutely. I mean, I still have a lot of concerns, don't get me wrong. However, I think I don't expect things to magically just change overnight, but as if I just see that motion that I was just talking about, that movement, I feel hopeful.
Yeah,
We got to start somewhere, right?
we do. We
And so
do.
you can't tear it all down. Remember that. I mean, as much as we'd want to,
Right.
sometimes
Right.
tear it down. We can't do
We
that.
can't do that.
At least not as an individual. It's not easy. Okay.
Right.
And I don't wish further, I don't wish apocalyptic things on this country by any stretch of the imagination anyway. That, oh, I didn't, and I'm not saying I even was happy the pandemic happened or anything like that. I'm not. It's just that we deal with the hands that we're dealt sometimes. Okay, so there were some good
Yeah.
things that kind of came of that. We try to take the good with the bad, that kind of thing. So yeah, so it's going to be a fun year. So we're
It
gonna
is.
bring you more in the very near future, and maybe only like two of you will watch this one. That's okay. You'll
If
come
if
back and
you're
watch it
watching,
later.
put in there put in the comments like things topics that you'd like us to talk about,
Absolutely, I'm
and we're
open.
going to try to be as real as possible without exposing people, like certain
Yeah,
patients, that sort of thing, right? Like
yeah,
keeping
yeah. No, I mean we're gonna keep
privacy.
everything super private and. We may tell a few stories here and there, but
Yeah.
we won't be giving out any names or anything crazy. So,
Yeah, but if you have topics you want to hear about, like we already have a laundry list of topics that we want to
yeah.
talk about, but
Yeah, but
um
I'm open and
yeah,
eventually we can do some live stuff, maybe a Q and a kind of format at some point. We get people
yeah, I
involved
love
once we
that.
have an audience to do that. We'll work into it. So, yeah,
Sounds
so
great.
I'm really excited for this year. Thank you everybody for joining us. This is our Tales from the Trenches of Healthcare, Complex Chronic Illness with Dr. Jamie Kunkle and Dr. Janell Payne. Do you want to
Yeah.
leave us with any thoughts here, Janelle?
I would say like keep up the hope that this is going to that we're going to find some key answers in the upcoming years to how to restore, especially if you suffer from a chronic illness. There is somebody out there for you. There's an answer for you. We just have to figure it out.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
There's always hope. Just remember
there's
that.
always
And
hope.
you're not
Yeah.
alone.
Oh, that's
There,
a good point. You're not
yeah.
alone.
It can feel very isolating, all this, and we'll get into that at a future date. But
Sure will.
there is support to be had out there, and there are more doctors, more practitioners that are wanting to understand these things. So the reason why I do a lot of this type of content creation is to get that information out there that I may not be able to see every one of those patients as an individual, but the more information that's out there, the more people can understand, the more your local doctors are going to start
Yes.
seeing that, and there are people that are operating within that system that are ready for change too. So
That was
uh
exactly my position on this, and that I just want to get the information out there. Like it helps to treat patients one on one, but like if I can just share what I know and like others have shared what they know with me, like that's the only way forward.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think the more we get community support and recognition, which I think is another way uh, to move this along, we're going to see more of that because like some places in this country have more access to say functional medicine, naturopathic care, whatever, and some places to a lesser extent. But almost every place I've ever been, even if it's really backwoods, rural somewhere, there's a hunger for this type of medicine. So
Yeah.
it's coming. It's in your backyard. If it's not already in your backyard, it will be in your backyard. So there's going to be
Right.
increased access and more opportunities. and more understanding, more knowledge, more everything. So we're gonna get there, and it takes a village. All it takes all of
Yes, too.
us,
Sure
the
does.
people on the front lines, the researchers, the politicians, the leaders of the community, the lawmakers. I mean, just everybody. It takes all of us
It's
to
time to
to
work
to.
together,
It's
right?
time to work together. That's
Yeah.
exactly what we need to do. And so let's figure out how to do it. Okay?
Yeah.
We'll do it. All right.
Love it.
All right,
Love it.
everybody.
Thanks,
Have a
Jamie.
good rest of your day. I wish
Enjoy
you
your
all the
Saturday.
best. Thank you. And we will talk soon. You'll
Okay.
see us later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, Confronting the Complex with Dr. Janell Payne and Dr. Jamie Kunkle. As a reminder, the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by Dr. Jamie Kunkle are solely his own and do not reflect the views, policies, or positions of Gordon Medical Associates or its affiliates. Any content, discussions, or advice shared on this podcast are independent of Gordon Medical Associates and should not be interpreted as a representation of Gordon Medical Associates. Gordon Medical Associates does not endorse or take responsibility for any statements or viewpoints expressed in this podcast. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.